You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream. The topic today is an incredibly serious one. You should see the title on your screens right about now. And it's called Demand a National Inquiry. Systemic Underage Rape Grooming Gang Scandal Rocks UK Establishment. The image you see on your screens there as the image for the show is in fact an image of all of the cases that have been convicted in various cities and towns across the UK. And as you will no doubt see from that image, it will, of course, be included in the Radical Dispatch tomorrow. The faces of those convicted for these crimes are depicted in those images because they have been, of course, convicted. Those images are sourced from media headlines. The topic of today there, as you see, is incredibly serious. The Times newspaper reporting on it today. You can see the headline from the Times dated the 7th of January, that's today, 2025, headlined, Elon Musk's comments on grooming gangs have spurred ministers to act. Subheading, Alexis J., head of the public inquiry into sex abuse. That's an inquiry that already exists, but its recommendations hadn't been implemented by this government. To continue, Alexis J., head of a public inquiry into sex abuse, admits intervention of tech billionaire has sped up official response, but rejects his call for a fresh investigation. Now, we're going to say a lot more on the Elon Musk related part of this story in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch. We're not going to focus on Musk for the purposes of this stream. We're going to focus on the underage rape gangs running amok in the United Kingdom and victimizing British children. But at this stage, what we will say is the following word of advice to Mr. Musk. This is advice to Elon Musk. We will collapse Starmer's new Labour regime over this underage rape grooming gang scandal, midazolam, and much more. Focus on that with us, and we will leave you alone. Wade into trying to undermine our national leaders by promoting anti-Muslim paid agitators, such as Stephen Yaxley Lennon, stage name Tommy Robinson, and you will face a brick wall the size of your flatulent underbelly. As I said, that's all we're going to say on Musk for the moment. Details of what we're referring to there and his endorsement of stage name Tommy Robinson, the anti-Muslim paid agitator and instigator of communal sectarian riots in the UK last August, in which 2 hotels with refugees inside them were torched by a lynch mob, and a mosque was attacked in Southport after a heinous massacre in Southport by a British Welsh-born to Rwandan immigrant parents teenager. Musk's endorsement of stage name Tommy Robinson after those riots were sparked is not something that goes down too well here in the United Kingdom by all people of all political persuasions. But as we said, there's a lot more detail on Musk and his shenanigans in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, which will be the written version of this stream. But today, for the stream, we're going to focus on the actual topic that is the topic that we've been pressing here in the UK for a long time, for many, many years, for a longer time than most people can comprehend when it comes to this national scandal. And the Times reports, again on your screens, what is the grooming gang scandal and how does Keir Starmer fit in? That's the 6th of Jan. And to give you, all of you watching this, a brief background into what exactly grooming or what I call rape gangs are about. This clip we're about to show you is on Global's LBC. Before they sack me, over Christmas during the COVID period without warning on Twitter, with 3 months remaining on my contract for which they still owe me money. This is the kind of work we used to do before we were cancelled on the UK's largest commercial radio group for speaking out in precisely this kind of way with inconvenient facts. But this will be a good summary for you on exactly what the issue is here that has rocked the UK establishment.
27 cities with probably thousands of underage young girls. It must lead to a Stephen Lawrence-style national inquiry looking into what the institutional failures have been. Well, here, the majority of these girls were in care homes and therefore were let down by these care homes. One girl was impregnated twice before the age of 15 in her care home because an adult predator was allowed into their care home to statutorily rape her, eventually found dead from a heroin overdose. There has been failures on an institutional level in the care homes up and down this country. There have been failures on an institutional level in the police up and down this country. And there have been failures on an institutional level in local Labour councils, probably not only Labour, but mainly Labour councils up and down this country, because people have been scared of being called racist. And the fear of racism, or the fear of so-called Islamophobia, which is a misnomer, the fear, more appropriately, of anti-Muslim bigotry, must never be an excuse to allow underage girls to be raped and abused in this way. Think of that. Imagine that. 27 cities and counting. Because I can guarantee you we haven't heard the end of this yet. Imagine the thousands of victims. Imagine the impunity with which these men must have been acting. Some of the girls as young as 11. One girl, if my memory serves me correctly, was in Oxford. One girl was even branded by her raper as property of, and then his name on her leg. And I think, if memory serves me correctly, that girl was 11 years old. It is an absolute disgrace. People have cared for their reputations over the safety of children in this country being raped and drugged and passed around like meat because of the bigotry and the prejudices of these Pakistani Muslim men who are looking down on these children as less than, as inferior, as some form of infidel that doesn't deserve honor or dignity. And I address you now here, oh woke left wing. You talk about believing the victim. Look it up. Go to your smartphone and Google Ella Hill. She writes a piece in The Independent in which she describes the religious extremist terminology her abusers were using as they were sexually exploiting her as a child, in which she talks of how they called her an infidel and how they abused her race and her lack of Islamic faith and justified treating her in this way because they viewed her as less than, because they believe themselves to be Muslim supremacists. Don't tell me that their Muslim identity had nothing to do with this. I have lived and breathed this community all of my life. I can guarantee you that it's not the cause, but a factor in the way in which these girls was treated was the culture of these men, and as part of that culture is their religious attitude towards non-Muslims. And that is the reason that you see almost exclusively that they are men like me, Pakistani, British, Muslim. Most of them, all of them Muslims, almost all Pakistani Muslims. And the victims, almost all underage white girls. We started to convict people. Yes, I listed those 27 cities for you, which is bad enough as it is. But where's the accountability for the police who covered this up? Where's the accountability for the Labour councils who covered this up? Where are the accolades for Anne Cryer MP, former Labour MP in Keighley, who raised this years and years ago, was a sole voice, crying out into the wilderness, beseeching people to listen to her? Then came Julie Bindel, the first to write columns about this, ignored. In fact, she writes herself that in 2007 she was looking into this and her pieces were shelved. Look how Sarah Champion was treated, Labour frontbencher who was sacked because she said this was a problem. And now finally the independent police watchdog has said, yes, it was covered up by the police. Well, that's not good enough, because nothing short of this national and statutory inquiry will satisfy the victims and bring them dignity and honour, but also quell the anger that is people are rightfully feeling as these cases unfold. As I say, it is.
Now, you may have heard there some of the details of some of the cases. The case transcripts are truly, truly horrific. It's important to understand that, of course, this is a specific problem among criminal elements within the British Pakistani Muslim male organized crime scene. Now, of course, criminal elements exist in every community. It's, again, relevant at this stage to break down type 1 and type 2 sexual offense categories. The majority of sexual offenses against children in the United Kingdom are committed by white men. That's understandable because the majority of the men in the country are also white. Of course, it's not understandable in the sense that these crimes are completely horrific. It's understandable statistically that the majority of men who are white in this country would be represented as the majority of sexual offenders against children as well. That isn't a surprise. That's not news. The news here is that if you look at the number of British Pakistani Muslim men in terms of population in this country, statistics, then that roughly sits at around 2%. You're half the number of census data of Muslims in this country. Let's say, to be generous, there are around 5% of this country is Muslim. Let's even add more for that for the undocumented migrants. Let's even say, to be very generous, 8%, which isn't really actually correct. France is around 10%, but the UK isn't around 8% Muslim. But let's be generous and give it that for the purposes of what we're going to say next. If, to be generous, 8% of this country is Muslim, then 50% of those will be women. So let's say 4% are Muslim men. How many of those, that 4%, are British Pakistani Muslim men? Even less than that 4%. Let's say around 3%, 2%. Again, being generous with the figure, because there are many Muslim communities in this country, and not just Pakistani British Muslims. Now, if you take that generous figure of 3% of British Muslims being British Pakistanis, and then compare that to the type of offense we're talking about, which isn't an individual pedophile attacking a child, but gangs, organized gangs on street level, who are making it their business and profiting from, on an organized level, entrapping underage white girls in the main, entrapping them with drugs, entrapping them with all manner of carrots. Remember, these are mostly vulnerable girls that were in care homes who don't have any money, for example, buying them things, sweets in stores. Once they're entrapped, these men in an organized gang context were abusing these underage children for the purposes of favors, money, and blackmail, with politicians involved. Now, in the gang context, not in the individual pedophile sense, but in the organized gang context, the vast majority of the on-street or street level so-called grooming or rape gang cases, the vast majority do involve British Pakistani men, to the extent that it's absolutely disproportionate to that generous figure, if you remember, that we just worked out, of roughly 3% of British Muslims who are Pakistani. Half that, because of course, not all of them are men. 50% of them will be women. So imagine the sheer number of disproportionate cases when it comes to British Pakistani men being involved in the organized rape gang criminal element on a street level. That's why this is news, because it's a huge cancer, a boil that needs to be lanced from within our community, my community. And we, as Muslims, are commanded to speak truth and to stand for justice, even if it's against our own selves. قُومُوا بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. Stand for justice, even if against your own selves. That is how we are commanded to walk the earth, remembering that there is a supreme creator observing every one of our actions, and we have been commanded and favored only because of this command that we enjoin the good and forbid the bad. Al-amru bil ma'ruf wal nahi anil munkar. That is the only reason that we have been favored by Allah as Muslims, for no other reason apart from the content of our character. This is something that is well known in the Quran. Kuntum khayrun ummatin ukhrijat linnas. You are the best nation that has been brought forward to mankind. Why? Ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhawna 'anil munkar. Because you command the good and forbid the bad. In other words, Allah is saying that our favor only exists because of the content of our character. We are commanded to speak truth even against our own selves. Any Muslim justifying, obfuscating, making excuses for this heinous national scandal should be ashamed of themselves. We are talking of the rape, entrapment, practical slavery, and branding of children in criminal organized contexts. It is a disgrace that anybody would seek to obfuscate around the figures. When, as head of Quilliam, after founding this counter-extremism organization in roughly 2008, We appointed our then director, Haris Rafiq, another British Pakistani man, to commission him to look into this scandal and write a report. That report is available for everybody to search online. Just search Quilliam Grooming Gangs report, Haris Rafiq. Some people have taken objection to the figure in that report that Haris Rafiq found. I didn't author the report, but the figure states that when you look at that comparison between the number of British Muslim Pakistani men in this country, remember, we said to be generous, put it around 2-3%, compared with a number of organized criminal rape, grooming gang cases, that report found that the number of those cases was sitting at 84%. 84% of grooming gang cases in which the perpetrators, the criminals, were British Pakistani men. That's a hugely disproportionate number. Now, some people have taken objection to that 84% figure based on the research methodology. That's perfectly fine. Let's not be offended by people taking a report that attempts to approach the subject with a social science method and improves on it with an even better social science method. Let's not get wedded to the figure of 84%, 86%, 80%. The point here is that if the number of British Pakistani men in this country is around 2 to 3%, to be generous with the figure, then the number of organized grooming gang cases should look absolutely nothing like what you see on your screens right now and those faces there. That's the point for anybody seeking to speak truth, even if against our own selves. For anybody who wants to stand for justice and command the good and forbid the bad and defend the children. Getting stuck in the obfuscation as to whether it's truly 84% or 80% or 60% misses the point entirely. For goodness sake, we're talking of children being raped by gangs of men up and down this country. We're talking of Labour councils that deliberately turned a blind eye. We're going to come to that because it was in their political interests. We're talking of police leadership of police. And we've got a whistleblower, a former police detective, Maggie Oliver, testifying to this point, which we're going to show you as well. Leadership of police, covering this up in cahoots with their Labour councils, in cahoots with Lord Nazir of Rotherham, who's faced paedophile allegations himself, a Labour peer, in cahoots with Lord Bernard Howe, who was at the time the head of the police, who faces similar media allegations himself. There has been a huge cover-up, and we did not need Elon Musk to tell us this. We've been on top of this for many years and have lost our lives and livelihoods over this very problem. Look at how Maggie Oliver was bullied out of work as a police detective for trying to raise this. Look at Anne Cryer, MP, having had to install a panic alarm in her home over a decade ago because she tried to raise this as a Labour MP. Look at what happened to frontbench Labour MP Sarah Champion when she tried to raise this as a Member of Parliament, was roundly ridiculed by her own party and many others for speaking up on this issue. It is a national scandal that is finally getting the attention that it deserves, even though Elon Musk's motives are nefarious for raising this topic. The fact that it's launched it once again to the forefront of the political agenda is credit where credit is due, despite we are being one of his most fiercest critics. Now, we mentioned the cover-up, which is why people are so upset. Understand why people are so upset. This is a systemic cover-up. We have institutional failures in our police, in our Labour government, and in our local Labour council, and in our child protection services, all of which have been complicit in covering this up, and for which multiple reports have also come to this same conclusion that they've been covering it up. And whistleblower, former police detective Maggie Oliver, in particular, has been speaking about Keir Starmer as Director of Public Prosecutions, covering this up when he made the decision, alongside other prosecutors, that a man who got a 13-year-old pregnant should not face charges of rape. This is former police detective Maggie Oliver saying as much on GB News. Have a listen to this.
I shouldn't have had to resign. It's still, 12 years on from that day, and we are still going round this same hamster wheel.
We need to see Keir Starmer stand up in the House of Commons and issue you a full and unreserved apology, don't we?
You know what, Bev? Empty words mean nothing to me. I want to see him put his actions where his mouth is. Blaming this problem on far-right extremists is actually dodging the issue. He was the director of public prosecutions when I resigned from Rochdale. And I resigned because the charges that were being levelled at the predators and the abusers of those men, I knew in detail. I knew what had happened to them because I've spoken to them all. Being threatened at gunpoint, being passed around a room like a ball, being raped on a daily basis. And he made the decision alongside the prosecutors that the man who got a 13-year-old pregnant didn't face charges of rape. He was out of prison in less than 4 years. As a tactical option, they put a child victim of that gang on the indictment so they could get her evidence into court without even telling her. Then they tried to take her children away from her. He was the DPP. And I'm sorry, when he says that his record is clear and good, I would take him straight back to that case, which 10 years later, Bev, the Chief Constable of Manchester has publicly acknowledged was borderline incompetence in the handling of it on many levels. And to this day, the CPS refused to apologise for putting that victim on the indictment as a purely tactical option. So we still have a long, long way to go. And so, words like yesterday, they can again actually are blaming victims and abuse victims for standing up for their right to have their abusers tackled and dealt with properly. It's smoke and mirrors, and I've heard these things so many times that I get really angry about it.
Yeah, well, so you should, and thank goodness for your anger, Maggie, because it keeps it driving forward, and we appreciate all the...
It's the cover-up that has upset so many people. It's the fact that the whistleblowers were gaslit into believing that they were the problem, being told they were racists rather than the organized criminal men that committed these attacks on underage girls. Those who spoke up were the ones who were blamed. They were cancelled. They were sacked. They were hounded. As we said, Anne Cryer, a member of parliament, installed a panic button in her home, abused, called a racist, turned on by their own friends and foes alike. It's the cover-up and the gaslighting that is so upset people. And the Times continues to elaborate. We showed you the headline earlier. What is the grooming gang scandal and how does Starmer fit in? Keep in mind the Times is particularly important in this case because it was the Times newspaper of London that first broke the story with their reporter, Andrew Norfolk. And so if you look to today's Times, all of this information is available in there. What are the grooming gangs? The Times says in the summer of 2003, Anne Cryer, who's an MP in Yorkshire, was approached by 7 mothers from Keighley, a town outside of Bradford. They said that they're pleased to help them protect their young daughters from their British Pakistani, quote, boyfriends were being ignored. She began a fight locally against social services and the police, who failed to see it as a crime and were petrified of being called racist. In return, the MP, who also campaigned against underage marriage and honour killings, was labelled a racist and became a target herself, eventually installing a panic button in her home. All those years ago, Anne Cryer personally came to visit me at Quilliam and pleaded with me as a British Pakistani man to take up this case. We like to think that we served our duty. And we hope that Anne Cryer gets the recognition that she finally deserves. The Times continues. It was against this background that Starmer, the former human rights barrister, was selected as the surprise choice to be the Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP. His appointment was announced in July 2008, and he took up the position in November of that year. Shortly after he took up the role, a critical child grooming case in Rochdale was dropped before trial by a CPS lawyer in July 2009. They had concluded that the victim would not come across as credible, even though one of her attacker's DNA was found on her underwear. It's the cover-up of the now Prime Minister Keir Starmer when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, working as the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, who chose not to prosecute such cases as the one you just read there, with the victim's underwear showing the DNA of her perpetrator being present. Keir Starmer chose not to proceed with that prosecution. It's the cover-up that has annoyed people, that has upset people, that has made people naturally demand for more than just platitudes and speeches. In the Times, we continue to read, there were other signs that the CPS, councils and police forces were failing victims. One serious case review published in 2010 found missed opportunities to help 2 grooming and abuse victims between 2008 and 2009. The girls who lived in care in Derby were instead treated as rebellious teenagers, the report found. Police became involved by chance at a car stop, and 13 men were convicted for what investigators described as a campaign of rape against children. Other trials also hinted at the problem. 9 men were convicted in August 2010 for forcing a 14-year-old into prostitution and using her as a commodity in Greater Manchester. The scandal lay in the cases that were not brought to trial. Starmer's team claims these cases never reached the DPP's office. Continuing from the Times, it was in 2010 that Andrew Norfolk, who was the Times correspondent, started investigating grooming gangs around Manchester. In news archives, he found that 53 of the 56 defendants involved in a sample of on-street grooming prosecutions since 1997 were Asian, British Asian. That's in the UK for American readers and watchers. When we say Asian in the UK, we mean South Asian as opposed to from the Far East. So Norfolk found that in a sample of on-street grooming prosecutions since 1997, 53 of the 56 defendants were Asian, mostly British Pakistani. The most damning revelation was the conspiracy of silence from councils, charities, and police forces who were publicly denying ethnicity had any relevance to the pattern of crime. The following year, Norfolk reported details, that's the Times, Andrew Norfolk, reported details from 200 restricted access documents showing police and child protection agencies in Rotherham had extensive knowledge of the activities of a gang of 5 men, but their offences went unprosecuted until 2010. And here is the original Times cover on this story. I remember this Times newspaper cover from the time. Here it is. A conspiracy of silence on UK sex gangs. That's from 2011. The Times finally ran a front page on it. But the subsequent action taken was a containment strategy. Keir Starmer, as Director of Public Prosecutions, appointed Nazir Afzal as his community prosecutor on this topic. Nazir Afzal led some of the most high-profile convictions in this country, and it is our contention. Over the course of this stream, we're going to demonstrate it with receipts that on behalf of Keir Starmer, Nazir Afzal was a containment measure, because Keir Starmer, being in charge of these prosecutions, was working to cover his own backside, because Keir Starmer himself is complicit in these goings-on. And we're going to continue demonstrating that. The Times continues, we brought in first ever national guidance on prosecuting child sexual abuse. Afzal, that's Afzal Nazir that we've just explained who he was. He's the Keir Starmer appointed prosecutor for looking at this. Afzal said, I led on them, but Starmer was with me on that journey. Every police force had their own guidance, so we persuaded the police to have one national police guideline on tackling these types of cases. Keir Starmer had conversation with the Home Secretary, and in 2013, child sexual abuse became a national policing priority. He allowed me to lead a national team of specialist prosecutors, which never existed before, and commissioned to set up the first ever child sexual abuse review panel, which he, meaning Keir Starmer, which he jointly chaired. So what we've got here in the Times is Nazir Afzal, the prosecutor appointed by Keir Starmer to prosecute most of the high-profile cases in this regard, has said that Keir Starmer jointly chaired. You see that? Keir Starmer jointly chaired the country's first ever child sexual abuse review panel. So you got somebody, Nazir Afzal, has been appointed by Keir Starmer, and they're both involved in apparently cleaning up this mess that is known as the grooming gang scandal or the underage rape gang scandal. Now, why we are showing you all this is because of what happened next, which we're going to come to. And that is, as the Times continues to report, every single one of the recommendations has not been implemented. But in addition, their investigations, that's the prosecutor Nazir Afzal and Keir Starmer, their investigations stopped at simply the street level. And that is those British Pakistani men in the gang context on street level who have been now convicted in multiple towns and cities, 27 and counting 4 years ago when we said that on LBC, convicted across the country in 27 towns and cities. Their investigations stopped there. What they didn't look at were the failings, the criminal failings of police, of local labor councils, of child protection services, and of national Labour government politicians, including Lord Nazir Afzal, a Labour peer who's been complicit in this, and Keir Starmer himself, now Prime Minister. We're going to continue elaborating. It was a containment measure, and you're going to see why. The Times goes on. A key demand of the Conservative Party and other critics of Starmer is for a fresh statutory inquiry into grooming gangs. You can see that in bold at the top there. We're going to go now to the middle of the page because the inquiries so far that they've done, and you see the second bold text in the middle, it has been criticised for giving scant attention to South Asian grooming gangs, including the prominent cases of Rochdale, Rotherham, and Telford. Now, what Nazir Afzal, the prosecutor in most of these cases, has done instead is, after his successful prosecutions of just the street-level criminals, instead of going after those that were providing cover and backing for them in the councils and the institutions and the government up and down the country run by Labour, instead of going after them, Nazir Afzal's containment measure, which worked up until now, was to praise Keir Starmer as having successfully allowed the prosecution. Can you see what happened? The lunatics were running the asylum. Here's Nazir Afzal posting this on his own page. I learned of grooming gangs from the Times in January 2011. That's the headline that we just showed you that the Times originally ran exposing this in 2011. So Nazir continues, I learned of grooming gangs from the Times in 2011. I became chief prosecutor in May 2011. I authorized charging Rochdale gang June 2011. After convictions, May 2012, Keir Starmer put me in charge of national response. Far-right thugs attacked my home. Thousands of rapists were brought to justice. That would be great if it were true. Here's our response. They are one big club. John McTernan, former political secretary to the war criminal Tony Blair, reposts the dud inquiry into rape grooming gang scandal that praises the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, despite the fact that Starmer, as head of the Crown Prosecution Service, chose not to prosecute notorious paedophile Sir Jimmy Savile. Rochdale prosecutor Nazir Afzal is also praised in the report that he himself retweeted praising himself. Afzal was appointed by Starmer to prosecute, in brackets read contain, the scandal, and he continues to praise Starmer despite the fact that Starmer has now appointed Epstein Island visitor and Blair's former director of comms, Lord Peter Mandelson, as UK ambassador to the United States. So the prosecutor that brought to justice many of the street-level criminals involved in this, credit where credit is due, Nazir Afzal, went on to completely and entirely absolve his boss, then Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, from having any role in this. Keir Starmer is now Prime Minister. When Director of Public Prosecutions, that same Keir Starmer, as head of the Crown Prosecution Service, chose not to prosecute Britain's most notorious serial paedophile, Sir Jimmy Savile. Once becoming Prime Minister, that same Keir Starmer, the one that Nazir Afzal continues to praise, decided to appoint Lord Mandelson as the British ambassador to the US. This is just last month he did it. Lord Mandelson is a confirmed visitor to Epstein Island. Lord Mandelson visited Epstein in his Manhattan mansion after Epstein was convicted for sex crimes against underage girls and trafficking. Lord Mandelson went to Paris with Epstein for his birthday celebrations. That same Lord Mandelson who visited Epstein Island has just been appointed by Keir Starmer as our ambassador to the United States. And Nazir Afzal, the public prosecutor, continues to praise Keir Starmer. He retweeted Tony Blair's former political secretary's post here. You can see at the top of the graphic, Nazir Afzal reposted John McTernan. John McTernan is Tony Blair's former political secretary. And he said, here's what the independent inquiry said. Read independent in quotation marks because the lunatics are running the asylum. They appointed themselves to look into themselves. And here it says, from the recommendations of the independent inquiry, we would also like to commend the work of the Director for Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, and the Chief Crown Prosecutor for the Northwest, Nazir Afzal, OBE. He was obviously rewarded for his hard work. Mr. Starmer has striven to improve the treatment of victims of sexual assault within the criminal justice system throughout his term as Director of Public Prosecutions. And when he leaves the Crown Prosecution Service this year, he will be missed. His response should provide a model to other agencies involved in tackling localized grooming. Here's Keir Starmer and the model that they hope provides for others against grooming. This is the Keir Starmer they're praising. The Telegraph reports 21st of June 2023, Sir Keir Starmer won't freeze out Mandelson over Epstein friendship. Subheading, JP Morgan report suggests that the Labour peers stayed at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse in 2009 while the billionaire was in prison. All of this is now confirmed. We'll be publishing all these receipts again in the Radical Dispatch tomorrow, but we have done so already multiple times. And let's not forget that it was none other than our own former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who's got many faults of his own, who stood in Parliament and said to Keir Starmer's face that this is what he did.
This leader of the opposition, a former director of public prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker. He, Mr. Speaker, chose to use this moment. He used this moment, Mr. Speaker, continually to prejudge a police inquiry. That's what he chose to do. He's reached his conclusions about it. I'm not going to reach any conclusions, and he would be entirely...
It's a matter of public record in Parliament on Hansard that Keir Starmer chose not to prosecute Britain's most notorious serial paedophile and friend of the King, Sir Jimmy Savile. What kind of example is Nazir Afzal, the prosecutor, asking or praising Keir Starmer for? What kind of example are they seeking to set? They are one big club. Now it will make more sense when we read this. John McTernan, former political secretary to war criminal Tony Blair, reposts the dud inquiry into rape grooming gang scandal that praises PM Sir Keir Starmer, despite the fact that Starmer, as head of the Crown Prosecution Service, chose not to prosecute notorious paedophile Sir Jimmy Savile. Rochdale prosecutor Nazir Afzal is also praised below. Afzal was appointed by Starmer to prosecute, brackets, contain the scandal, and he continues to praise Starmer, despite the fact that Starmer has now appointed Epstein Island visitor and Blair's former director of comms, Lord Peter Mandelson, as UK ambassador to the US. We are not going to let them get away with it. It's as simple as that. If you look at the bottom of that text, you see three simple words: we are coming. If you haven't realized by now, we are coming. You're not going to get away with this. All of you, every single one of you will be exposed. We've been on this agenda for a long time. Remember this? April 2023, we are ruled over by a class of pathetic parasites who are easily controlled through compromat and blackmail by a global cabal of psychopaths who facilitate their depravity in exchange for control. Every one of them will be exposed. We are coming. Since we posted that You've had revelations of the Epstein unsealed documents from the court, from the trial judge, revealing multiple names, including Lord Mandelson, who visited Epstein Island. In addition, you've had the P. Diddy case. In addition, you've got the underage rape grooming gang scandal in the United Kingdom. Multiple cases have come to light of celebrities, politicians, public figures, all involved in this. And despite that, they continue to seek to cover up by accusing those who are speaking up of being far right. Again, Maggie Oliver, the whistleblower, former police detective. I am incandescent with rage, she says. To write them off as far right is insulting to the extreme. Former Greater Manchester police detective Maggie Oliver accuses Keir Starmer of deflecting from the grooming gang's row by smearing concerns as far right. We'll play you that clip of Maggie Oliver as well.
How do you feel when you see the Prime Minister Keir Starmer today seemingly brushing off demands for a full, transparent, apolitical inquiry as amplifying the message of the far right?
Hi, Martin. It won't surprise you that I am incandescent with rage. I am no far-right activist. I am a woman who gave 16 years of my life to the police, and protecting children was number one priority in my life. I know Marlon very well, nor is he a far-right extremist. All the victims that I know and that we support are victims who have had their lives destroyed. To write them off as far-right extremists is insulting in the extreme, and it's another indication of how it's deflecting from the issues. It's trying to take the debate around from the real problem. And Marlon is quite right. The ICSA National Abuse Inquiry looked at many areas. 2 weeks was given to the organised networks. And I was one of the non-institutional core participants. I did a 50-page statement that was decimated to 18 pages. I was not allowed to give evidence. Many other non-institutional people who were witnesses were also denied that opportunity. There was one victim given a paltry 2 hours. The rest of that time was given to those in positions of influence, senior police officers, social workers, council leaders, all of whom were actually responsible for us being in this position in the first place. So it was a great missed opportunity. And I was devastated back then because I put faith in Alexis J because she knew Rotherham. I don't know who was pulling her strings, whether she was being prevented from looking at the towns and cities where this had happened. Charlie is absolutely right. You know, Rochdale, Rotherham, Telford, Oxford, Huddersfield, none of those towns were part of this review. The other thing to remember is that and the ICSA inquiry did highlight this, that absolutely there is no data collected about the ethnicity of the offenders. I would say that is a deliberate attempt to muddy the waters. And local inquiries don't work. Recommendations fall by the wayside. In fact, the Augusta review and the Rochdale review, I would say, were very good, very complete reports that uncovered an awful lot of the failures. But the mainstream media in London barely referred to them. This is a national problem, and we need to elevate it onto a national basis. In relation to Oldham, I would say that report in Oldham was a complete whitewash. There was one victim that was finally allowed to have her voice heard. And the only reason for that was because she came directly to me just before the report was due to be published and said, you know, I've never been approached. Oldham Council had told the review team that they must not under any circumstances approach her because she was suicidal. That was a lie. I don't know what was said about other victims, but I do not trust Oldham Council as far as I can throw them. And I feel that if we are going to go down the road of a national inquiry, the question isn't are we going to have one? It's who's going to lead it? What are the terms of reference? Are victims going to be front and centre of that inquiry? Are people like me, like the Centre for Women's Justice, like Marlon, like Parents Against Child Exploitation, are they going to be given free rein to speak the truth? Because without that, it's another pointless exercise in a cover-up. But we are not far-right extremists. We are ordinary people who see children being abused on an industrial scale without understanding the reasons and addressing those. We're never going to see the changes.
May Allah protect you, Maggie Oliver, for the work you're doing on behalf of all of these victims and the foundation you're running. I've attended, disclosure, I've attended Maggie Oliver's charitable foundation work as a guest of hers. She's doing incredibly important work to try and raise the alarm bells on this. And she's right, a national inquiry is needed. As we said in the LBC clip we showed you earlier from 4 years ago, before we were cancelled. And the Times today runs with the same Times leader or editorial. The Times view on grooming gangs line of inquiry, the leading article from the 6th, 2025, and it states the following here. The Prime Minister was wrong to imply on Monday that fears and concerns about grooming gangs were akin to jumping on the far-right bandwagon. You see that there? Cannot risk dismissing genuine concerns simply for its own political protection. That's the government, yeah? Cannot risk dismissing genuine concerns simply for its own political protection. Going down to the middle where the bold in bold writing is, a new national inquiry is needed to explore where and how these gangs operated. It must not skirt around the sensitive subjects, including ethnicity. It should not replicate mistakes of the past. Now right to the bottom. If the victims of grooming gangs are to receive the justice that is long overdue, it requires a swift, independent and public process aimed at exposing in full detail one of the deepest ills of our age. Nigel Farage was asked about this call for a national inquiry on my own former station, LBC, that sacked me for doing this kind of work. Farage has said, if Labour do not hold a full public inquiry into the rape gang scandal, then Reform UK will. We will appoint independent ex-judges and experts. There is an overwhelming demand for it. And here is Nigel Farage saying exactly that to my former colleague on LBC, Nick Ferrari.
To come back briefly, if we could, to the scandal of grooming gangs. The Prime Minister seeming to say that any politician, or indeed anyone who seemed to support the idea of a public inquiry, was effectively getting on the bandwagon of being a right-winger. Nigel Farage, how do you respond to that?
I get a bit bored with this far-right label. I mean, the BBC use it about virtually every country in the world these days. I mean, I've no doubt Canada very soon will go far-right, and Italy's gone far-right. And look, I honestly believe that through the police, through social services, through the last days of the Labour government, through the entirety of the last Conservative government, there has been a concerted attempt to play this down for fear of what it might do, for fear of being called racist. The irony is that the attacks themselves were racist. This was anti-white female racism. Of that I have no doubt. And let me say this, Nick. If the government will not hold a full public inquiry, and how interesting that the Times editorial today has come out strongly in support of it, I'll say this to you now. If they won't do it, we at Reform will do it. I will have no difficulty in raising the money to do this whatsoever. We'll appoint independent ex-judges and experts, and we will have this out in public. And I hope, Sakir...
Will you have the statutory powers that will be granted to you through a public inquiry?
No, I won't have the statutory powers, but I tell you what, I think this would garner such massive public support that anybody that was asked to appear that didn't appear would look terrible.
What would your deadline be for the government to take action?
Well, I think we've probably got a few weeks, but no more than that. And I think there is now overwhelming demand for us to know the full, unvarnished truth, however horrid it may be.
So today is the January the 7th. You'll give them to the end of January?
Effectively, yes. And if we, Nick, I promise you, I can raise the money for it today. Not from Elon Musk either. I can raise the money for it today, and we can do this. And I mean it. I mean it. And I think that the government will know that when I say something, I mean it. So I tell you what, guys.
And you notice that reference to Elon Musk at the end. We've just posted the advice again. Elon Musk. We will collapse Starmer's new Labour regime over this underage rape grooming gang scandal, Mid-Aslam, and much more. Focus on that with us and we'll leave you alone. Wade into trying to undermine our national leaders by promoting anti-Muslim paid agitators, such as stage name Tommy Robinson, and you'll face a brick wall the size of your flatulent underbelly. That's all we've got time for today's Warrior Creed live stream. We end with this Colombo meme. We've posted it on Radical Media many times. You can see there, excuse me, sir, just one more thing. Are pedophiles deliberately chosen for positions of power so that if they cannot be bought, they can always be blackmailed? That, as we've tried to explain over multiple episodes over many years, is how we are run at the moment. The parasites are in charge. But rest assured, this issue will not be allowed to be sidelined. We will not drop this. We will not allow for excuses nor obfuscation around this, whether such excuses and obfuscation come from those in power or from people within my own British, Pakistani, Muslim community. We will not stop until these child victims see justice, because we are coming. You've been listening to The Radical, Majid Nawaz, for this Warrior Creed live stream. Thank you for your patience. We'll be back next week at the same time.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.